Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Hail Yes, a Detroit Free Press podcast about University of Michigan athletics. I'm Tony Garcia, Michigan football and basketball writer for The Free, joined by our Big Ten insider, Reiner Sabin. Reiner, I was just thinking about it. That title now holds even more weight because 18 teams in the Big Ten, really, with the season behind us, I'm operating like there's already 18 teams in the Big Ten. Michigan, USC, kickoff time just announced for 3:30 on September 21st. If you hadn't seen that, are you ready for the added role?
I think. Yes. I mean, with four extra teams for the West Coast, I wish they would send me to the West Coast for a few weeks this year, just to kind of get a sense and feel of these Pac-12 teams. But that's not in the cards, Tony. So I'll be back here with you for the majority of this, because you know what? We are the Detroit Free Press, and we cover Michigan teams.
We do. And if you had it your way, you'd be back in Santa Monica.
I like me some California, but I don't know. It's a high cost of living, and again, it's a different thing to visit versus actually live. So I like my abode here in Southeast Michigan.
Good. Then we'll keep you around. And California, that's really more the ritzy area. That's where we find people like Andrew Burkle, our editor, our producer. He's the Santa Monica guy of the podcast, right? Who never feels any pressure.
Shots across the bow for no reason. Thanks, Tony.
Yes. No.
Yeah.
We all thrive over there.
Yeah,
no, it's not a bad thing. Not a bad thing.
Yeah. I mean, shoot. I mean, Jim Harbaugh and the whole Michigan defensive staff is living it up on that side. I mean, with Manhattan Beach, Hermosa, and all that stuff right next to the new facility for the Chargers. So,
where is that new facility?
It's going to be in El Segundo.
Okay.
So
Did you see Jim earlier this week? The press conference talking about he's using I'm waking up 3:30, 4 in the morning, and I'm like, it's not the next day, it's today.
3:34 in the morning, woke up, staring straight at the ceiling, and said to myself, it's not just another day, it's today. And maybe that's just another way of saying attack this day with an enthusiasm unknown to mankind. But it was a great day.
He also was talking about how he it's not Ann Arbor anymore, because he was at like some Dodgers gala, and he's like seeing like celebrities and curb your enthusiasm. So he seems to be liking the LA lifestyle so far.
Yeah, it fits him, right? I mean, he's a movie character guy. He's just he, as much as he tries to be the Midwest guy, right? Or says he tries to be. Harbaugh loves the lights. Harbaugh loves the show, and he's a showman. And so, I mean, it all fits. And then never mind the pick with Joe Alt, just the most obvious selection that I think there's ever been in the history of the NFL draft. I should have put my entire life savings, like all $45 of it, on that because it would have been that was a lock. All right. So here's what we are planning for today. It's not actually just talking about the West Coast and Jim Harbaugh, as much fun as that is. We are just about done with the 2023-24 Michigan athletics calendar year, and it was one of the more memorable athletic campaigns that I can ever recall for one university. Maybe that's hyperbole. I don't think it is. It's just there was a lot, which got us thinking, what are some of those most memorable moments from this year when we are old and decrepit and we look back at when we were young and youthful and handsome, maybe, and in our prime and all that good stuff? What will we remember about that 23-24 Michigan athletic season? So we, Andrew, Reiner, and myself have come up with a list of 10, we think, pretty memorable days, weeks, moments, happenings. We're just going to get into them a little bit, rank them back from 10 all the way up to 1. And we'd love any feedback. If you want to leave comments, I mean, you know how to reach us on Twitter at Real Tony Garcia, at Reiner Sabin. Email us. Leave a comment on wherever you're listening to your podcasts, and then there will be more feedback and a little more interaction, perhaps in what is our last episode of this season next week. So, Reiner, Andrew, are we ready?
Ready to go.
Okay, good. I was thinking maybe we were going to get some silence. I was going to take the silence as a yes, but very good. Number 10, Reiner, you just touched on it. It is the mass exodus from the football staff this winter. I think it's memorable. We think it's memorable because it just doesn't happen like that very often in the way that it did.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was unusual. I mean, Jim Harbaugh had a chance to maybe build a perennial power at Michigan after, finally winning the national championship that everybody thought was his destiny. But then he obviously left for the Chargers and then brought the entire defensive staff that was really kind of crucial to the resurgence of, the program itself during the last 3 seasons. And so that was huge. And obviously the exodus of talent across the board. I mean, J.J. McCarthy entering the pros early, a year early, when he had an extra year of eligibility. And then, obviously 17 other guys that were invited to the combine. Huge losses there. I mean, the offense was pretty much gutted. Some really key pieces from the defense also left. And so, yeah, Michigan's in somewhat of a transition mode, which kind of mutes the effect, I guess, of the championship in the sense that, like, there's no guarantee that it's going to continue at all.
Yeah, and really the striking part for me of this aspect wasn't as much the players, even if JJ leaving, which I think happened because they won the national championship. That part was probably the most surprising of all the players, but the coaching staff for Harbaugh to, I mean, he likes his staff, right? But you just never see, or rarely see a coach go from A to B, wherever that next stop might be, and take the majority of the staff, almost literally the entire defensive portion of the coaching staff. And I mean, that will always just sit in my brain as I was surprised. I maybe I'm not saying this well. I thought that I wrote before the season, I thought this was going to be Jim Harbaugh's last year in Ann Arbor. I thought Michigan was going to win the national title. I thought Jim Harbaugh was going to leave. That part's not surprising. It's the Mike Elston. It's the 3 linebacker coaches turnovers. It's Steve Klingscale. It's certainly Jesse Minter. It's Ben Herbert, right? On and on and on. So just.
And Jay Harbaugh, I mean, going to Seattle, his move obviously triggered Jay Harbaugh to leave too, because, Jay Harbaugh would have stayed, obviously, if Jim was still there. And so, and he's a big loss too, because he did a good job really running the special teams and was really kind of a utility player from a assistant coach standpoint, having coached running backs, tight ends, in secondary, and obviously special teams as well. So, this is a guy who kind of showed his stuff and probably could have had a coordinator role at another school earlier if he had chosen to do that. Showed some real promise there. So, yeah, those were big losses and, left Sharon Moore in a difficult spot, having to build out the defense. He went to, a guy that was familiar with, obviously, the Baltimore Ravens scheme with Wink Martindale. But, the guy hasn't coached in college football for 20 years. And his system, the way he runs the system is quite a bit different than the way Jesse Minter and Mike McDonald ran their system. So, it's going to be interesting to see how that works. And plus, with the fact that Wink Martindale was thrown in with a bunch of new defensive assistants that he's never really worked with before, it's going to be interesting to see how the chemistry develops within the defensive staff. That was never the issue, obviously, last year with the way the staff was organized and structured. He didn't have those questions as much.
No, and now those questions sort of linger because I mean, we can touch on it very briefly. There have already been issues with the new coaching staff, right? Or
Right.
I guess a holdover, right? Greg Scruggs arrested allegedly for OWI, let go. Denard Robinson, obviously one of the faces or big face around the program. Harbaugh brought him back on in 22. He had moved over to the recruiting staff lately. He's also arrested allegedly for OWI. And as of yesterday, it was confirmed he's no longer on staff. So it's that ripple effect, right? I think that's the whole memorable part of this. It's not just that guys are leaving. Stephen Adegoke was maybe going to be coming in from the Houston Texans. Then he doesn't come in, right? It was just, it was a pretty chaotic coaching shift from January. For a national championship team from January to April, mid-April, to go through to lose 5-6 coaches, to add 5-6 coaches, to have multiple arrests, and to have another coach kind of come, then talk out of it, for Steve Clinkscale to say he was going to stay, and then, as we reported first, for him to actually end up leaving, right? It was the whole, it's not just that there's a lot of guys, it's how it all happened. That's what I think.
Yeah, no, it was very, very turbulent, and it hasn't been easy for Jerome Moore, and I think it's affected the recruiting. The recruiting was very slow to start, and so I think that also had to do with it. Even bringing somebody like Tony Alford, from Ohio State, hasn't had the huge bounce that you would expect, and so they haven't really capitalized on the national championship from a recruiting perspective so far.
Yeah, not yet. Let's go to number 9 because they capitalized on this moment in a big way. We have Michigan versus Ohio State, the Zach Zinter injury. Just to reset the stage, it's late third quarter, tied at 17. Michigan has the ball on the Ohio State. They're driving, getting close to the red zone, right around the 22, I think is where they were, when an Ohio State defensive lineman falls the wrong way on Zach Zinter, snaps his leg. Very gruesome. The entire game halted for 10, 15 minutes. Bring the cart out, bring the stretcher out. He's a captain, right? He's a 2-time Joe Moore Award winner, one of the faces of this line. On the very next play, Reiner, Blake Corum, who, yes, tremendous back, really hadn't had a lot of big moments this year. Certainly not like the year before. Little shimmy, little cut, and 22 yards later, he's in the end zone. He flashes the 6'5" right at the camera. That's a goosebumps moment for sure.
Yeah, it was a pretty dramatic moment. It's kind of swung the momentum back in Michigan's favor after Ohio State went on a long drive where they really ran it up the gut. It was actually that drive reminded me of Ohio State in 2019 before Michigan kind of shifted the rivalry in their favor, and it kind of looked like it was going back to that. And then the injury happened and Corum scored and everything kind of reset again in Michigan's favor. So yeah, that was a pretty crucial moment in the season, arguably one of the most. Who knows what would have happened then? The whole complexion of everything could have changed had it continued along the track that it looked like it was going when Ohio State really had that scoring drive in the third quarter.
Yeah, because I don't think Michigan had never trailed, right? I think all season. I don't think they had ever fallen behind. That was the first time they were tied in the second half of a game, right? So, you like their chances. You think they've got some mettle, but you just never know how it's gonna shake out, right? If you don't, just immediately punch them in the mouth right after that, because there was all the chance in the world for that to take the sails or the wind out of Michigan's sails, right? Usually it happens the other way. It's like, oh no, like our anchor in the middle, he's gone. What are we going to do? The momentum's flipping towards Ohio State. Things are snowballing the wrong way. To just one play, flip it, and then never trail again, right? Just pretty big.
And then you had a couple other big plays in that game. Obviously, Quentin Johnson's big hit. And then you had, obviously, the Ron Moore interception at the end of the game. when Ohio State was driving. I mean, like, people don't realize. I mean, forget about that. I think it's just like, oh, it's just Ohio State. You know, it didn't come through again. I mean, they played hard, and it was close up until the very end, and they had a shot. You know, they needed Michigan needed to make some plays in that game, and they did. I mean, there was a lot of gut check moments there. You know, fourth and short that, you know, Sharon Moore made some, you know, gutsy calls, and you know, kind of really sealed probably his selection as the successor to Jim Harbaugh with some of the stuff that he did in that game too.
Yeah, agreed. Number 8, Reiner, is we have part 1 labeled next to this. It is the Harbaugh suspension saga, because there were a couple, obviously, but part 1, the one we're talking about, really sort of set the tone for the season in a way, just that there was always going to be something going on, right? We're headed down here. I set the table for the last one. I want to hear you. I want to hear you. I'm going to let's have you set the table for this and take us through what you remember. Did we drive down were we driving down together?
Well, no, we drove down separately, but it was like, it was on the eve of the Big Ten media days when it looked like there was going to be a negotiated resolution worked out where, you know, they would come to some, you know, decision where Harbaugh would miss 4 games at some point. But that fell through. Ultimately, Michigan still wanted to take care of this situation, get out in front of it. And so they, Ward Manuel, you know, went ahead and suspended him the first 3 games, which really wasn't that huge of a punishment considering that he could coach during, you know, the week, and he was missing games against East Carolina, UNLV, and Bowling Green. So, I mean, it wasn't much, but then, you know, the guys on the team made such a big deal about it. It was kind of ridiculous in some ways. I mean, the whole train formation holding up for like this, like some kind of tragic incident happened with Jim Harbaugh, which wasn't the case. I mean, he was watching the first game with Sharon Moore having sandwiches, and then like the second week, I think he was.
Is it a Suns flag?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, like it wasn't. But there was this martyr element of Jim Harbaugh and like free Harbaugh T-shirts and all this stuff, and it was used as a rallying cry. And like, you know, talking to another Big Ten coach, I mean, they felt like a lot of this stuff was very much a unifying factor for Michigan throughout the season. Like a lot of the hubbub and like, you know, in this age of NIL and portal stuff, I mean, it almost was like an unusually strong thing. And, you know, Jim Harbaugh announced, you know, it alluded to that over the time that it was actually in some ways made them stronger, all this stuff.
Oh, it was the opposite. He, like how Saban called it rat poison, Harbaugh had a line for it. I can't remember. Remember? I mean, he said, like, he was like thanking people, right?
Yeah.
He's like, oh, this is like the best thing anyone can do for us. No, totally. In an era with a lot of this Michigan football team really did embody we. And whether or not it was rooted in reality or they had to conjure up and manufacture this chip on their shoulder, they deserve all the credit in the world for finding a way to do that. I do think it was funny, and like how they had that. I'm not going to put a modifier on it. How they had that train play or whatever,
it was
planned out ahead of time. It was somewhat amusing to me that they were pinned so far back on the opening series. Remember the initial punt went to like the 1 or the 2, so they couldn't do it. They had to just run it 3 times, get it out of the end zone, punt, then get it back, and then do this whole like ode circus tribute thing. And it's like, there's 9 minutes left in the first quarter. Like this is no longer the beginning of the game.
And also the free Harbaugh thing was so ridiculous because it was their own university that punished Harbaugh. I mean, it was like Harbaugh, you're basically challenging your administration. Like, they didn't have to go ahead and do that. They just thought it was smart to get out in front of it to mitigate potential punishment. Which again,
and look at what happened now. I think I think Ward's probably glad he did that.
Yeah, sure. He went ahead and did that. Who knows? The hammer could have dropped even harder on Michigan had they not been cooperative in that sense. Again, it was the problem with this situation was that it was Harbaugh fighting one battle and Michigan fighting their own. Trying to kind of keep things from having a huge long-term effect, whereas Jim, had his own agenda. With Tom
because
Moore.
Michigan, the university, the program was charged with level 2 violations.
Yeah, right.
Everyone had to deal with, and Jim Harbaugh specifically was dealing with a level 1.
Yeah, right. And they were fighting battles on separate fronts, and that was part of, I think, what ultimately led to some of the divorce actually between the two sides, and not being able to come to a contract, agreement. Is that there was some of this kind of separate fighting going on between Michigan and Jim Harbaugh, and they weren't exactly unified.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think it helped. I just don't see how Michigan was ever. I don't see. There's no number that Michigan could have kept him at.
Yeah, I agree.
People don't understand that he was ready to go.
But I think for the people who wanted the contract extension before, I think that was a big sticking point.
Yes. Yep. I'm with you. Number 7, and then we'll get to 6, and that's when we're going to break. Number 7 is that Dusty May is hired by the basketball program. Now, this is sort of putting the cart before the horse a little bit, because higher up on the list, we will have some of the things that precipitated this, right? However, by going from bottom to top, you're gonna get ahead of yourself a little bit. Everybody, if you're listening to this podcast, you know what has happened. However, we're just gonna keep this to the Dusty May portion of it, and then we'll talk about the rest. That was their guy, Reiner, right? Like, even beforehand, when things were going wrong with the program, and it's like, oh man, like who's Michigan even going to get? When it felt like Michigan needed a guy, he really was kind of the top candidate. And then when you see how quickly he put things together, just at least on paper, how it seems to make sense when you hear him, the things he talks about, the things he said, it's just, I don't know realistically how the first 45, 50 days, whatever, of the Dusty May era could have really gone any better.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think he's off to a very fast start and good start. And credit to Ward Manuel. He again was pretty quick in going through this process, and didn't wait. Didn't wait to really get rid of Juwan Howard. Did that within 48 hours of the season ending, and then moved quickly to hire Dusty May right after FAU got eliminated from the tournament, and flew down and got the deal done, and he was announced the following week, introduced the following week, and they basically have been off and running ever since. And so I think the whole process was pretty seamless, and they got a guy who clearly knows how to put together a program, did it at a group of 5 took them to a Final Four, conceivably could do that. And Michigan, plus he's familiar with the Big Ten, having been a person who student manager or whatever, a grad assistant working for Bobby Knight and at Indiana. So this is a person who really is familiar with the area. So I think in general, it seems like it checks off a lot of boxes.
It really did, and just the way they get. I know you said it a bit, but they should get credit for. Now. If you're Michigan, you should be able to pull a coach away from Florida Atlantic. That feels like you should be able to do it. That said, Louisville, a powerhouse, was making a real push at him at the same time. And yes, it's Florida Atlantic. It's still Boca Raton. That's still that's not a bad place to let. He's got a good. He had things pretty well set. But I loved the way it was described to us, or I was impressed by, I should say, just sort of the pitch, right? Knowing the importance of John Beilein, and using him as a cog. And Ward was like, look, Dusty doesn't want to ask me these X and O questions about what you can and can't. Like, I know what it looks like from up here. I don't know what it looks like from right here. So I'm going to bring our last guy who did better than anyone else. He was top 5 coach in America during his tenure. I'm going to bring him, and he's going to answer. I'm going to answer the questions I can. He's going to answer the questions you can, and you won't leave here wondering. You will know, right? And I just think, I mean, so often an interview can get away from you, right? And then it's just what ifs, or like, we don't know how these things work behind the scenes, really. I thought that was really great insight into sort of their plan, their action, and it worked.
Yeah. No, again, it was one of Ward Manuel's best moments. I mean, again, they kind of went against the narrative that he's kind of slow, not proactive, more reactive, and instead he seemed like he actually got out in front of it, was pretty organized in how he went about it, and again got the guy that he really wanted and was at the top of his list.
Number 6, Penn State week, the flight, and that Sharon Moore has to coach. Man, Reiner, I'm glad that we're going to take a break after this one, because, man, I mean, just rehashing all these things, like, you remember these times, living all this. Oh boy, I was in the process of moving. Nobody cares. I had just moved like a few weeks before. Like, I wasn't even settled. Like, right now, I'm very comfortably podcasting. I remember I was going back across, like, I was going to my mom's to try to find a quiet room to podcast in. That's all irrelevant. But that's just what I think of when I think back to this time. Again, we'll have you walk us through this one, Reiner. Take us back to it's week 9-ish. Michigan's about to play their first top 10 game of the season.
Yeah, and so it's like the Friday before, on the flight tour to State College, Central Pennsylvania, word comes down that Jim Harbaugh is suspended the final 3 games by Tony Petitti and the Big Ten after the Connor Stallion saga. They found evidence through the NCAA that indeed that there was some kind of plot that was initiated where they were doing advanced scouting to find the play signals of future opponents, and so it was pretty dramatic moment. And then you didn't know if Harbaugh was indeed going to coach, because Michigan looked like they were going to file for a temporary, or they did file for a temporary restraining order, hoping to get some kind of ruling on it before game time. And so it was like, you didn't know basically up until 90 minutes before kickoff who was going to be coaching the team. And ultimately it was Sharon Moore. And then after that, Sharon Moore, has one of his biggest flourishes as a head coach where, again, Penn State with Chop Robinson basically coming off the edge and just killing Carson Barnhart. And ultimately it was probably going to kill J.J. McCarthy if it continued. So Sharon Moore pivoted again and neutralized Manny Diaz's blitz-heavy defense, pass rush-heavy defense, by running the ball 32 straight times to end the game, 24-15. Then you get, come off of that, everybody's like, extremely pumped from Michigan's standpoint. They feel like they defied the world. And, then there was more drama between Michigan and the Big Ten. I mean, you got all sorts of things floating, like Michigan's threatening to leave the Big Ten, which is just ridiculous. And then, that they were going to go challenge this again in court, and they were going to have a hearing, and Jim Harbaugh was going to make his case in front of a judge. And this was, going to be in downtown Ann Arbor. And then, lo and behold, they pull it. Eventually, Chris Partridge resigns during that period of time, right there. And it's much ado about nothing. It was like, it was all this bravado and bluster coming from Michigan. Meanwhile, Big Ten is just kind of holding back and then basically trying to call their bluff. And ultimately, Michigan didn't really come forward with the reaction. So ultimately, Harbaugh was suspended the final 3 games.
Well summarized. And it was in that stretch, it was in that week where all those things you just said, as far-fetched as they were, some important people, using that term somewhat loosely. I mean, we're discussing these things, right? Like, there was actual, what do we do now? Like, how does the Big Ten handle this? How does the university handle this? I mean, is the seat like? You remember? I mean, are they even going to be allowed to play in the Big Ten championship? Are they postseason eligible? Because there were, once the Big Ten had to get involved a couple weeks earlier when they were playing at Michigan State, that's when you knew this was not just some small potatoes, or I mean, maybe in the minds of fans it is, but not in the minds of the movers and shakers of college football. People were taking this seriously, and it all reached a head on that flight to State College. Michigan lands. They all tweet out bet, and the rest is history. Again, talk about that unifying factor that you were referencing earlier. I mean, they all said as much to us, right? Throughout the year.
Michigan versus everybody thing was really
that was the beginning of it.
That was the beginning of the, where they kept pumping, but then they were saying they were America's team, and it was like a huge contradiction, which I asked Sharon Moore, and he just he didn't really have a good answer for that. I mean,
didn't he say we whatever people want? He's like, we're whatever people want. Like, it's like us against everyone, and everyone's on our side. Yeah,
but you couldn't.
All right,
you couldn't really marry the two up, and so totally ridiculous. But it was totally ridiculous, the whole thing in the first place. I mean, it was like the height of absurdity, like college football absurdity, all playing out in like a very condensed time period. And I think, ultimately the Big Ten would have loved if one of those teams, Penn State, Maryland, Ohio State, just knocked off Michigan and pretty much ended this whole situation. But, now they didn't. And, you got to the Big Ten championship game, which also ended with a whimper. Everybody was thinking there was going to be some dramatic moment when Tony Petitti handed the trophy to, the Harbaugh in Michigan, and that never happened. And so
he handed it to Zinter. Zinter,
Zinter,
yeah.
So there wasn't those fireworks that everybody thought would happen.
No. But back to, Sharon Moore, the cognitive dissonance is striking. But that said, I am of the opinion. I think the right team. I think the best team won the national championship. I really believe Michigan. There's no part of me, none, that doesn't think Michigan was the best team in college football last year.
I think, when you look at the,
I would have liked to see him play Georgia. That would have been fun.
Yeah, that would have been obviously really good. And so, Alabama obviously, nipped Georgia, and Georgia has only itself to blame for that. But Michigan, probably was top to bottom the most complete team. The sad thing about it with Michigan, though, is just that there's always people that are going to question how they got to that point, how the program got to the point where they were that good. After kind of being in this kind of good but not great, territory under Jim Harbaugh for a while. And then you have the two dual NCAA things going on with, the Stallions investigation plus the secondary violations, which, when you add them up, do provide some kind of advantage to Michigan. So, there's always going to be questions about how they went about it. But when you look at the team and the way that they performed, they had, the highest turnover margin in the country, and they committed some of the fewest penalties. From an execution standpoint, you couldn't get much better than what Michigan did. And so they really were a good team, like an excellent team.
Tremendous team. No, totally. All right. We're gonna hit a break, pay some bills. On the other side, with a little bit of pace, the top 5 moments we will remember from the 2023-24 Michigan athletic season. Don't go away. This is Hail Yes. All right, Reiner, we are back. Number 5 on our list of top 10 moments that we will remember from the 2023-24 Michigan athletic season. We've touched on this a little bit in 2 different ways. Now we're sort of marrying it together because all these things work. There's all sort of part and parcel of the same thing. But it was Jim Harbaugh leaving and Juwan Howard being fired 56 days apart. Now, I want to come up with a parallel or like a metaphor for what that would be like in another industry. And I'm not sure what it would be. If either of you, Andrew, you as well, of course, have one, please jump in. But I try to paint the picture for like my friends or family, what it mean. Like the coaches don't leave very frequently. Certainly not this high profile, certainly not 2, and certainly not 2 in 2 months. And it was just, I mean, you saw it coming in slow motion, but then when it happened, I mean, it's still weird to me that the Jim Harbaugh and Juwan Howard eras are over. Done.
Well, it's especially unique in this case because both are not just alums, but some of the most famous alums. I mean, Jim Harbaugh was the star quarterback at Michigan. Juwan Howard was the star big man at Michigan. They both then became coaches of their programs. And honestly, it was kind of part of the Michigan brand. It was part of the Michigan brand too for a while. Like, hey, these are Michigan men who are kind of, back and running the Michigan programs. And then for them to both be gone in that quickly, I mean, you could say quarterback, or you could say coach and GM in the NFL. No, that's not the same because those are package deals a lot of times, right? So that's not really the same. I mean, the football, basketball programs are the staples of the athletic department. So to lose both coaches was, I think we don't even put enough emphasis on how crazy that was sometimes.
Yeah, well, I agree. I mean, and it took a huge sizzle factor out of Michigan. I mean, it does. I mean, as much as Dusty May looks like he's probably going to be a much more maybe competent coach over the long term, where like, this is going to be a well-run program that probably serves Michigan well. And, maybe Sharon Moore can continue Harbaugh's program and bring it into a new era. There's not as much of there's no sizzle factor with both of these guys compared to what Jim Harbaugh and Juwan Howard were. I mean, the buzz around both, whether it was good or bad, was huge. People had very strong opinions about both, positive and negative. So, I mean, it was you're not going to have the same there. And I think the interest level might, decrease a little bit, even within the fan base as much. I mean, there'll be a little bit more, like the casual fan is just not going to tune in maybe as much as they would if it was Jim Harbaugh, or they're not going to keep abreast of the program quite as much, if it was Jim Harbaugh or Juwan Howard.
I wonder if that's true. I think it might be true, but I view things so differently oftentimes that maybe than a lot of people in the sense that, like, I'll hear people talking about, this seems like a weird parallel, about Jared Goff, right? And what he can do and what he can't do. And it's like, oh, like, well, he's not sexy enough. There's not enough sizzle. There's not, like, that's why people don't like it. It's like, who cares? You don't need sizzle. You don't need stick. You don't need anything. You just need to win. That's all that matters, right? And for me. And so, and I'm not saying you feel that way. And so I'm saying, I wonder if these programs are able to win.
Yeah, but the Goff comparison is really not as apples and oranges, because Goff has been part of the Lions during this unusual period where they're excellent, and after years of just being plain out bad, and so he's kind of, so I don't think individually.
Okay, then let me not use that specific example.
Kind of associated with the Lions' rise as much, I don't think. I mean, whether you want to start getting into the game manager versus, like, is he top 5 level quarterback? That's a whole different debate. I'm talking about, like, a guy who attracts attention and interest just by virtue of himself being there. And Juwan,
lightning rod.
And yeah, exactly. And Jim Harbaugh and Juwan Howard were that. And so they don't have that. I mean, Sharon Moore has no name recognition really in the sport itself. I mean, he was barely a coordinator for, a year, a full time, a sole coordinator. So, I mean, like, there's nothing there. And whereas Dusty May, brought a team to the Final Four, he did so at a Group of 5 program, and still isn't like a huge name in the sport, and that people are totally familiar with. And most casual people, if you went down the street and asked who Dusty May was, they probably wouldn't know. They would probably have a sense of who Juwan Howard was.
Yeah, around here. I mean, he had been a name for. I think you're right. I think you're right in the sense of the. I mean, there's no doubt in terms of the sizzle for sure. I just as an offensive line guy in football, you've heard me preach it on this podcast for years. I don't need sexy. I've never needed it. I just need results.
But I think we do need sexy, though, to somewhat in college sport, because you're trying to sell the program. I mean, part of the coach is marketing, and again, Michigan's recruiting hasn't gotten off to a great start, and part of that is because I think somewhat related to the fact people don't really know who Sharon Moore is. They know Jim Harbaugh.
Something, Reiner, that you've talked about that's, a good, interesting perspective is, remember, like, throwing it back to how much promotion and how much promoting that Harbaugh did when he first arrived at Michigan. I mean, he was everywhere. He had his satellite camps. He had the Michigan Fest that, like, Todd McShay was coming to, and all kinds of other craziness. And just, it was all going on when he first got there. And that was Jim Harbaugh doing that. So I think that if Sharon is modeling himself after Jim, I mean, Jim did care about that stuff. You know what I mean? And he was Jim Harbaugh. So like you said, Reiner, it is interesting contradiction when you look back at the start of the Harbaugh regime.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have to learn, and only, God, there's nothing worse than let it play out or time will tell. But we will need some time to see how Sharon Moore's strategy of just, I mean, there's in the shadows, and then there's wherever Sharon Moore is. I mean, he's been a ghost. He has been a ghost since he was a full-time hire. And maybe it'll work out. Maybe we'll see in June. I mean, just Steve Kasula, the tight end coach, earlier today, he was tweeting some eye emojis. I'm expecting a commit somewhat soon, but just I guess we'll never know. Or not we'll never know, but we won't know until it plays out a little further. All right. Number 4, God, I can see how long we can talk about all these, but we really got to do our best to keep it somewhat timely. Number 4 is Juwan Howard, his heart surgery, the altercation with John Sanderson, and how that all was just the beginning of a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad season. 2-17 to finish over the final 19. Just any negative words you want to say that are not degrading about people individually, but about the sport and about the team and about the execution, I think it's probably all fair.
You had a firsthand look at it more so than I did. So, I mean,
don't remind me.
It must have been dreadful to watch. I mean, but yeah, I mean, there was a lot of turbulence with the program, even leading up to that period. I mean, it just seemed like, it was heading towards this direction. I mean, the wheels were starting to come off, even the last, couple of years. I mean, Hunter Dickinson's departure was indicative of that too. I mean, it just, things were kind of headed in a bad direction. And then you had the heart surgery and him being sidelined, and you didn't know who was really coaching the team. I mean, it was bizarre. And then, you had the altercation, obviously, with Sanderson, which ended up kind of dredging back up the incident at Wisconsin from a couple of years ago that led to a 5-game suspension for Juwan. And,
it also, quickly, Reiner, it also brought back the questions, just before we move on, the questions of nepotism, right? Because a lot of people were upset about that 2 years ago with what Jace Howard was allowed to get away with defensively rebounding. And now this is, Jet Howard. And now this situation involved Jace Howard, Juwan's son. Sorry, didn't mean to step on you. Just
Sure. No. I mean, and that's that criticism was there, and then obviously the roster construction was bad, and it just didn't seem like they knew, they had an idea of a way to get out of this rut, which I think is what the conclusion that Ward Manuel finally made, was that there was no way that this guy was going to get this program back to a championship level. He didn't really have a plan, tax strategy. I mean, there total misfires with, again, the way that he handled some of these commitment announcements before these guys were admitted to the university. We're referring to Terrence Shannon Jr. and also Caleb Love. I mean, it just, all of it added up to just bad stuff. And so it was not working, and they had to hit the eject button here.
Yep. We were in Minneapolis after Michigan lost on Wednesday in the Big Ten tournament to Penn State. And I asked Juwan Howard, what is the identity of this team and this program? And he got super upset. He was really perturbed. He really did not like that question. And he was just talking about how they have a culture. He didn't explain what the culture was, but we have a culture. That's not answering the question. All right, had to sneeze. That's not answering the question, right? To say we have a culture. I'm asking, are you an offensive-minded team? Are you a defensive-minded team? Do you play in transition? Are you just going to take high percentage shots and just shoot threes and get it down low? Are you going to only facilitate the offense through a point guard who has to set everything up? Or is it going to be free flowing like the NBA? How much are you going to stretch it for? How are you going to play? What are your defensive pillars and philosophies? Because sometimes they were man and sometimes they were zone. And yes, you want to mix it up, but it didn't look like they did either well at all. And so for 5 years in, to not have any calling card, anything that it's this is what we do. That to me was, if there was a final straw, the final straw. That brings us to number 3. Now, many of you might think that number 3 would have been our number 1. And as we get to 3 and 2 and 1, we'll explain why it finished as number 3. But I'm sure it was many of your favorite moments. I don't know how much, this is the second time I'm saying the word hyperbole. I don't know how much hyperbole this is. Maybe some of your favorite moments, if you're listening to this in your life, I don't know. But number 3, Michigan football wins the national championship. The Wolverines, they suffocated Washington in Houston. It was 34-13. Just a lot of textbook, right? You got a classic Mikey Sainristil deep interception. You got Corum running in a few. You got JJ doing enough, not stealing the show, but not turning it over, doing everything right. And then the defense just imposing their will. Kenneth Grant, right? The one sack of the game was just a behemoth monstrosity of a man, just bulldozing over another human. It was just a little bit of everything. And Reiner, I know your father, right, went to Michigan. Is that right? My dad works at Michigan. My mom worked at Michigan. My twin sister went to Michigan. I'm from Ann Arbor. A lot of best friends who went to U of M. And it was hard not to feel happy for them, right? It was hard not to feel happy for a lot of the good people, a lot of the good players. I mean, it was a really cool moment. You never know when you're going to be in this industry. If you're ever, we're not all Reiner. We don't all cover Alabama going to multiple national championships. I wonder, am I ever going to be am I ever going to get to see what the moment is like up close? And in a lot of ways, I think we said this back then, and not in a rooting for Michigan sense. If any of you know me, you know we don't do that. But it's just kind of felt like we won a national championship, for the Free Press. Just very enjoyable, just big, deep run, a lot of money, a lot of subs, books, just really good stuff.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. watched Michigan's 1997 season too. You were probably too young, Tony, but yeah. So
I went to some of the games, but I was sitting on my parents' lap.
I remember that pretty vividly myself, and so I mean, this one was even more interesting, obviously, because of all the crazy off the field stuff and what they had to kind of overcome on the field to kind of get there. Plus, I mean, obviously we'll get to it eventually, but just, the way that they had to beat some of the teams that kind of, a lot of people doubted whether they could beat those kind of teams, like talking about the SEC level teams in the college football playoff. And so like to just get to the stage where they're, competing for the national champion. I mean, it felt like a foregone conclusion when they got to Houston that they were going to win it at that point, because they just basically survived all of that. And, to go undefeated is pretty, remarkable in this day and age, because there are 15 games. When Michigan won it in 97, there was, it's 12 games, and, they're playing Washington State in the Rose Bowl. It's not the same, and they're not the quality of teams that you had to play at the end. Now, I mean, Michigan's criticism, I guess, and part of it was that they had a very easy non-conference schedule, and
but that was all proven irrelevant. That was proven irrelevant.
That was all proven irrelevant after the fact. I mean, where you had they had to go through again Ohio State, Alabama, Penn State, and then eventually Washington. So I mean, it was impressive. Again, they, as I alluded to before, I mean, they executed extremely well throughout the season. I mean, again, they had the highest turnover margin, and were tied for like the fewest penalties per game in the country. And so this was a team that really performed well game in and game out. And they had unusual team chemistry. So it was a worthy national champion in that regard.
Yeah, no, it was just a lot of good. I mean, just very well played football. Just very good football. Just doing things well coached, well focused, just all the things you need to do. No loose ends. And that's how you win a national championship. There cannot be any. There can't be one. Or someone will pull that thread and you will come undone. And yeah, I mean, certainly it takes something pretty memorable has to happen in order to surpass that, right?
That's what I was going to say is why is this not number one for you guys? I mean, I agree with it, but why is it not number one?
Well, because of what number one and number two are. And I guess we'll just get to number two for me. Is which we've alluded to and everyone knows what it is. It's the Connor Stallions saga, the sign stealing scandal, plot, whatever you want to call it. That was one of the most jarring college football stories in the midst of a season that I can ever recall. Teams win national championships every year. Every single year, there's a national champion. Actually, funny enough, there's going to be another one next year. There's not always this. There is not always a scandal that the conference has to get involved and go to your rival and say, hey, we think we have reason to believe that they know what you're going to do. You can't be using these signals. So you got to change stuff. I'm sorry. Come again? What'd you just say? They know what now? Who's doing what? I mean, Connor Stallions, as it appeared, and again, this is still alleged, was on the Central Michigan sideline in a disguise in East Lansing in the opening week, trying to, I mean, who knows what, get signals, get calls, get an advantage, I think is the case. And the fact that it just wasn't just this season, it wasn't just last season, but Reiner, what were the final numbers? I mean, I wrote it so many times. I think it was 35. Was it 35 games? Almost like 17 different teams across 3 seasons who were affected, where Stallions or accomplices were buying tickets, then and then he was having other people sit in those seats with binoculars, scout illegally scout the signs and the GAs would do on the sideline, so they could then have a better idea whenever Michigan would play. Hey, these are sort of the signs that we need to decode, and then they can decode it even quicker. And then you know how to adjust, you know what's coming, and all of that. Again, I think we have done I think we just gave Michigan a ton of credit for winning the national championship. They have a bunch of great coaches, bunch of great players. That was that point. This is now this point. And it was one of the craziest, in my mind, college football scandals of our lifetime. This is not tattoos.
Yeah, no, I mean, because it affected potentially the integrity of the results in that season and going forward. I mean, or it could have had that effect if it continued. And so, and it just raised questions about, the integrity of what you're watching and the validity of it all. And so, and it still does. I mean, some people, again, Pete Smith, the Ohio State athletic director, basically, or outgoing athletic director, basically suggested that, an asterisk needed to be placed on, these last couple of seasons or whatever, especially the results as pertain to Michigan, Ohio State. And, people are going to argue that back and forth. I mean, depending on your personal biases, how much they feel that that's true or not. But it was a crazy story. We didn't even get into the whole, Central Michigan, crazy portion of that, as with the guy that looked like Connor Stalions being seen on the sideline at the opener between Central Michigan and Michigan State in East Lansing. So we didn't get into that whole side of it, which was bizarre, where Jim McElwain's having to answer about it, and it was a crazy story involving a guy that nobody really knew who he was, and people tried to distance themselves from it.
Nobody on the outside knew who he was.
Outside, yeah.
Everybody inside the program.
Right. Yeah, right.
They were calling him by his first name, right? When we were asking Blake about it, he's like, "Oh yeah, Connor."
Yeah, sure.
That's not how I refer to
Well, sure. No, nobody. But this was not a big known name or person, and even his backstory seemed very strange and interesting. Again, people think it's would be a heck of a Netflix special at some point, and it probably will be. He's going to get paid a lot of money, I think, to tell his story about what really happened. But yeah, this was a thing that again really affects how people view Michigan's national championship, and just you put 2 and 2 together. The conspiracy theorists are going to be like, well, Michigan wasn't beating Ohio State. They couldn't beat Ohio State 0-5, under Harbaugh. And, they looked like they were dead to rights in 2020 at 2-4. And Harbaugh was, backed in the corner. Almost lost his job, and then he said he's going to do everything at Big Ten Media Days in 2021. He's going to, try to beat Ohio State or die trying. And then lo and behold, you have this, scandal with Stallions that basically started at exactly that same time, 2021. And so people are going to talk about what the ultimate impact was. Now, my thinking is people don't see the psychological impact of what this could have possibly produced. Whereas I don't know if it had play to play as much of an impact as much as a huge psychological impact. If it were, executed in the way that we all think it was, where, again, in 2020, when Don Brown was the defensive coordinator, they were getting beat, man to man.
That's right and center.
Michigan State, what? What'd you say?
There's a left, right, and center. They were getting beat all over the field.
But Michigan State and the DBs were openly questioning why, they weren't adjusting and doing those things. So this, new staff comes in, and they have to sell this to the players. And what's the best way to sell players? Hey, you're in the right position and you're making plays. You're going to buy into the coaching a lot more if what they say is actually what is happening on the field. And so, and it's working. And I think that could have been the psychological boost and really could have helped the program in the long term by, kind of inviting that buy-in factor quicker than it probably would have happened if it, maybe this didn't happen. So, but you just never know. You really don't know. And that's the problem with this whole thing. Like, you don't know the actual real impact.
And nobody ever will. It will be one of life's unanswerable questions. However, the future we'll see how that plays out, right? And then I think the future will also sort of cast how we look at this era, right? Like, sometimes you need time to pass in order to get all the perspective and to really have a lens on something. And I think in a few years we'll have even more clarity. And to get back to Andrew's question, why was the national championship number 3? It is because the Connor Stallion saga was number 2, and all 3 of us were there. Andrew was not at the national championship, so he didn't want to seem biased just by being in the moment. But Reiner and I both agreed that the number 1 moment that we will remember from the 2023-24 Michigan athletic season is the Rose Bowl. Michigan, Alabama, the final Rose Bowl of the 4-team playoff era. Down by a touchdown, first time trailing all season, 4 minutes left. JJ McCarthy finds Blake Corum on 4th and 2. The more I watched that play, it was a pretty well-designed play. Yes, it was a busted coverage, but they shifted. They moved. They went to a bunch formation. They had 2 wide right. They went to a bunch formation by the right tight end. They bring Blake in, and then they just run him out on a little flat route. He's completely unchecked. Then later, you got the crosser to Roman, just a huge catch and run. Then Corum ties it up in the final minute or so, touchdown. And then overtime winner, the goal line stand. 4th and 2, goal line, Michigan, Alabama, spot in the national championship on the line. The mountains in the background, the sun has set, and you could hear a pin drop in that stadium. Everyone is just focused. And just thinking about it, I can go back to that moment and remember it. When Josiah Stewart and Derek Moore collapsed off those edges and dropped Jalen Milroe in the backfield, I remember my jaw dropped. I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my God, they're actually going to the national championship. Like, they're really going to the national championship. There were all the moments, all the crazies, everything. We've talked about for the last hour. All of that stuff had happened, and yet here they were. Ending Nick Saban's career, knocking the Big Ten, dethroning the SEC. Just all the things that had been said for decades that could not happen, that would not happen. That was the moment they did it. And for me, that's why it's bigger than the national championship.
Yeah, I agree. It was very cinematic. Notwithstanding the fact that they were just outside of Hollywood when this thing happened, but it was a hugely dramatic moment. Rose Bowl obviously has huge ties to the Michigan program. It's kind of seen as the game in the program. A lot of them talked about even winning the Rose Bowl ring was probably their Rose Bowl ring was more meaningful to them than even the national championship ring. It's weird. That's largely goes back to Bo Schembechler, and I think it was.
It's why we have our list the way we do.
I know, but
we're not the only ones who see it this way.
I know, but
it's weird. It's weird, but it's the way it is.
No, but I think the Bo Schembechler thing was a coping mechanism for why they were never the national championship. They were never there. It was and his Rose Bowl record was pretty terrible, actually. And so 5-12 or whatever. And so I think it's 5-12. And so, yeah, to win the Rose Bowl, that way again, and to win the national again, Bo Schembechler never won the national championship. And
2-8 Rose Bowls. 2
yeah, 2-8. Okay, 5-12 probably overall.
5-12 in bowl games, I believe.
Overall, yeah. And so, going back to Harbaugh. I mean, I think Harbaugh winning the Rose Bowl was particularly meaningful too, just because of, again, the history with the program and what it meant, and then to go on and basically outdo his mentor, Bo Schembechler by winning the national championship. That was big, and also again, beating Alabama. They were the kind of the modern dynasty, whatever. I mean, there was not a vintage Alabama team. This is not Nick Saban's best team. I mean, shoot, they were lost to Texas pretty badly in week 2. Week 3, they were really struggling against South Florida. Like, Nick Saban had to get do a lot to get this program even in position to be in the Rose Bowl. I mean, the win over Georgia was very surprising considering what it was. Still, that was Alabama. They were up, 20-13. Michigan had to rally in the final minutes. There was that big 4th down conversion, from McCarthy to Corum, and then there's also the tip throw to Roman Wilson. There were just some very, very big plays on that game time drive, and Michigan kind of showed its true mettle there, and that's why this game kind of encapsulated everything about the Michigan thing, because it was like, when it came down to a crucial moment, Michigan came through, not only once but twice or 3 times, because you had Corum, dragging guys across the goal line in the overtime. You got the sense then that Alabama was defeated there, and then obviously the final play with Milroe being stopped 2 yards short. I mean, again, goal line stand, what have you. I mean, it was pretty dramatic.
I think, like you said, Reiner, a lot of it has to do with how the game itself played out. Obviously, you have the Rose Bowl. I mean, TV makes it seem picturesque. I mean, you see it through the TV and you're like, wow. And then you go there and it literally feels like you're at Disneyland or something like that. Like football is Disneyland. Like everything's kind of clean in the stadium. There's not trash anywhere. You look around and anywhere you look, it's beautiful. And then you're like, oh, and there's also a football game happening here.
Yeah.
And also for that game, in the metaphors within that game, you have JJ going on the drive to tie things up. You have so many big moments in that game that felt so important. Like Michigan was literally getting over this hump that they couldn't get over. They obviously were taking the steps. You had the Georgia game. Well, they weren't on that level yet. You have the TCU game. We're like, oh my God, what happened? And this Alabama game at times felt like it was kind of the same thing. And then for Michigan to get over that hump on that stage at the Rose Bowl, I just think it wasn't going to be topped. It's almost like the Miracle on Ice. You know what I mean? This was the game before the game that really everyone talks about as the game.
Right. Nope. Totally. I couldn't agree with that comparison more, because the Rose Bowl, as you guys have both hashed out, is historically the most important game to Michigan. Alabama, there is no bigger name. Nothing more.
Both of us wanted to go to this. I mean, before the season started,
we had it circled. It was sugar.
It was something like I wanted to check. I'd been to. I mean, I don't want to brag, but I'd been to the 5 other, major bowl games in the year 6 order. But yeah, that one, like I would have traded all those just to go to this one, just because it's what you think of when you think of college football.
Yeah. This is my parting thought. And I might have said this on this podcast before, but it would have been many months ago. One of the things that I don't care for too much in media is there's always this thing where everyone one-ups each other, right? And I'm not saying, and not what you just did. You're very humble. But I'm saying everyone is always just, oh, I've been to this. Oh, I've been to, you know what I mean? Like everyone's too cool for school.
Yeah.
There was not one person who was too cool for school at the Rose Bowl. You know what I mean? Because whenever like we're at the Fiesta Bowl, it's like, oh, well, it's not like the Cotton Bowl was, or like then I'm at the Final Four for basketball, and it's like, oh, well, the 2017 Final Four. I'm like, I don't care. Like, it's a Final Four. It's cool. Like, I'm just saying this is a cool thing. Everyone's always, oh, this, oh, that. Not that day. Like, people were like literally stopping to smell the roses.
Yeah.
So
it was again, you consider the scale of the game itself, and then what actually happened and how it ended and everything else, what it meant, for Michigan, and the fact that it was literally, the same setting where they won the national championship in '97. So here they were. I mean, basically, this was the ticket to the national championship for them in 2023. And so it's like, I mean, it had everything. I mean, the buildup was pretty dramatic. The ending was dramatic. What happened afterward was dramatic. I mean, it was like, and everybody realized it in the moment that this was pretty special, and there wasn't like any doubt about it. And I think the consensus opinion is that it's going to be one of the most memorable events, if not the most memorable in Michigan history.
One last thing. It was just like, I remember, Tony, like it just sticks in my head. Obviously, we're talking about this a lot from our perspective. The people listening to this will remember it as like fans too. You know what I mean? Like from our perspective, we came in on a bus from downtown LA. We're going through the mountains and like kind of coming into the stadium, and we get out and we get to in front of the stadium, and there's grills going. You see like the smoke coming up. There's tons of fans already there, like clearly been set up for hours. It was just one of those days where I wouldn't have traded my experience for anything in the world. But I was like, I wish I could do this from two different people's perspective. You know what I mean? Like those fans, like that looked like such an amazing day, as well. And then you have like, you got to kind of see what they were going through, and then you got to swipe back into action of what we were doing. But it's like, dang, what a day for anyone who was there.
Everyone involved. I remember my when I was in school and at Michigan State, and Michigan State went to the Rose Bowl. I did not go, but my roommates, two of my roommates went, and it is still. I mean, it's how we talk about this, right? I mean, I think they would both throw it on. Short of their, only one of them was married, but short of like the wedding day, I think both of them would say top 2-3 day of their life. Reiner, final thought.
It was also weird from a personal perspective, having covered Michigan and Alabama, that was Nick Saban's last game. And, I was there for it randomly. I mean, I didn't expect that to happen after I left Alabama in 2019 to come to the Free Press. And so it was interesting, just to see that up close and what it ultimately was, because we obviously didn't know that Nick Saban was going to retire about 10 days later. But, it was kind of meaningful from a personal standpoint, just having covered both programs, and, particularly him, and, even Jim Harbaugh. I mean, it was Jim Harbaugh's last game in Michigan, or second to last game in Michigan, penultimate game. And then also Nick Saban's last game.
Yeah, no. And then for that to be Nick Saban's last game, and then randomly, separately, Oakland to beat Kentucky, and that to be John Calipari's last game at Kentucky.
Right.
And I was randomly at both 90 days away. And
now John Calipari is coaching mine.
And now he's at your old school. That's right, at Arkansas. So, all right. Here's the list one more time. Number 10, the mass exodus following the national title and the hiring of Sharon Moore. Number 2, Michigan, Ohio State, Zach Zinter's injury and the response. Number 8, Jim Harbaugh suspension saga part 1. Number 7, Dusty May is hired swiftly from FAU. Number 6, Penn State week, the flight, the bet tweet, Sharon Moore having to coach. Number 5, Harbaugh leaves and Juwan Howard is fired in the span of 56 days. Number 4, the season from hell that was basketball, Juwan's heart surgery, the altercation with John Sanderson, and the most losses in a single season in program history. Number 3, winning the national championship. Number 2, one of the most notable college football scandals of the modern era. And number 1, an overtime victory over Alabama in the Rose Bowl. Holy hell. What a year. Really very blessed that we got to be a part of it. Thanks to all of you for following and reading along. And here's the great thing about sports is there's more coming, and we have no idea what it is. And we're going to talk about it, and we're going to analyze it, and we're going to predict, and we're going to be wrong, and then we're going to go back, and we're going to think about it, and then we're going to do it all again. So it'll be great. One last episode coming before we sign off for the first half of the summer. So that will be next week. We still need to figure out exactly what to do because we just kind of put a bow on things. I'm thinking mailbag. We're probably going to open it up to all of you. Any questions remaining for Reiner, for Andrew, for myself, Michigan football, Michigan basketball, Andrew's whereabouts in fancy California, hotels, whatever is on your mind, we can discuss it. So that will be for next week, and we'll make sure that we get these questions out in lots of capacity. So there's ways for you to ask. Okay, that was a long episode. Thanks to our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, our sports editor, Kirkland Crawford, our audio engineer, Robin Chan. For Andrew, for Reiner, I'm Tony. Talk to you next time.